Okay, dear folks, this will be the fourth video lecture on a peer view of hears, and also will be the last lecture for this book. And starting from next week, we are going to move to the second book for this class, called Waiting, by a Chinese American writer, Jin. So this again, as I want to emphasize, this will be our last video for this book. And before we get started, I think we have some important issues for discussion or for review, especially the whole book is divided into two parts, and some important issues that have been addressed in part one, such as the setting of the novel. Always bear in mind, where does the story take place? Where does the story happen? And when does it happen? This is called the setting, the time and the place. And we know you can call this, like I mentioned here, a tale of two cities. This reminds us one of the very famous novels in the 19th century written by Charles Dickens, A Tale of Two Cities, talking about what happened between London and Paris at that time. But here, it happens between London and Nagasaki, Japan. Okay, so this is the setting. And at that time, the Second World War just ended, and the communists started the so-called Korean War. Okay, the Korean War. So don't forget, during that time, Japan obviously was a changing and transitional society. Because it's changing, it's transitional, it implies, the so-called conflicts between different sets of value systems, the conflict between different generations. So in this novel, we have two generations, like Jiro, Etsuko's husband, or Shijio, Jiro's roommate, classmate. They represent the so-called new generation of Japan, or you could call it the post-war generation. Whereas Ogata-san, Jiro's father, Etsuko's father-in-law, he represents the old generation, the so-called the generation of militant Japan, the Japan that started the Second World War in Asia Pacific. So this is something for us to remember. Living in such a changing society, character from different generations might find the society become more and more difficult to live on because it's changing. And if you just stick to your old value system, you come to realize the whole world is upside down. Okay, so just bear in mind the setting of the novel, and also, the novel was set during the time of the Korean War. It happened in the year 1950 to the year 1953 because of the war. So even though Japan was just heavily defeated during the Second World War, the United States, the democratic bloc, the democratic group need to rearm, 重新武装 Japan in order to fight the Korean War. And Japan, starting from the Korean War, Japan start its process of recovery until it became like world number one, economic power. Even today, Japan is still very strong in its, economics. So this is the setting of the novel. And then I think another important question for us to review is the so-called narrative perspective. Narrative perspective, in other words, it's the so-called point of view. From which position from which perspective, from which point of view, the speaker tells a story. And we learn from the book that the speaker always uses I throughout the novel. So obviously, it's a first-person narrator. In other words, the one who is involved in the story speaks up and tells his or her own story. In this book, it happens to be Etsuko, the mother, the woman who married twice, one with a Japanese husband, and gave birth to Keiko, the elder sister. The second time with an English-British gentleman and gave birth to Nikki. Okay, so don't forget, her storytelling was triggered, actually was aroused by the visit of Nikki, okay, who is visiting her. So we have mentioned the whole story, the whole narration actually is based upon Etsuko's memory. In this sense, the whole novel could be described as Etsuko's memoir, 回忆录. And we also learn Nikki stayed only 5 days with the mother. How long she planned to stay in the first place? Actually, we have no idea. But obviously, as the narration goes, we come to learn actually Nikki had planned to stay far, far longer. But for some reason, both mother and daughter find it very difficult to get along with each other. So after 5 days, Nikki decides to leave. And it also happens in April. And I asked you some weeks ago, how come of all the months in the year, the author placed the story in April? And we remember the line from T.S. Eliot, The Wasteland. It says, April is the coolest month of the year because in April, it's a month of memory and desire. So the whole novel, you could use this phrase, memory and desire, desire and memory, as a crucial phrase to summarize the whole book. So I think, several important questions for us to ask is the purpose of Nikki's visit. Why? Why does Nikki feel obliged to visit the mother? Okay? And obviously, we come to realize the visit starts Etsuko's narration. So could we argue because both mother and daughter both are haunted by the death of Keiko, you could say the death of Keiko serves more or less like a ghost. In this sense, it's a ghost story. So both mother and daughter are haunted by Keiko's death. It's kind of nightmare. And both try to get rid of the nightmare, to remove the nightmare. How to get rid of the nightmare? I think, from this perspective, you could argue storytelling itself or writing itself is a kind of therapy, 心理治疗. Okay, a kind of therapy. Okay, this is some important issue for us to review. Also, in part 1, what is mentioned so often is Etsuko's dream of a girl at first, dream of a girl playing on a swing. But as Etsuko, mentioned her dream, the more she mentioned it, the more she came to realize, actually, it's not a girl playing on a swing. 荡秋千的女孩子, no. Actually, the whole picture reflects, the fact that the memory was about Keiko's death, who used a rope to hang herself to death in Manchester. Okay, so the dream has become an important part of the story. Why? Why the story needs to include the dream? I think if we are interested in the dream aspect of this novel, one important book for us to read could be Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams, still one of the very classics in this area. 弗洛伊德梦的解析 And dream, according to Freud, has much to do with the repression of one's desire. Because in the daytime, you have a certain strong desire, but you don't want to make your desire known, public. So you try to repress it, hide it. But the dream at the end, in the evening, comes up. This is, a very simple interpretation of the dream. So I think the dream, because the dream has appeared from the beginning to the end of the novel, so the dream is an important part of this book. Okay, then I think to get started with part 2 from chapter 7 to chapter 11. As I mentioned in my previous lectures, when we approach a book, we need to know the overall structure of the novel. And the novel, as we know it, actually is divided into 2 parts. Part 1 and part 2. With part 1 has altogether 6 chapters, and part 2 has 5 chapters from chapter 7 and chapter 11. So we are going to address some important issue of the novel. The title again of the novel is called A Pale View of Hears. View means sight, beautiful sight, good view, good sight. Pale means not very clear because you look at it from distance. You look at it very remotely. So if you look at a scene from a distant place, then it's not clear. It's called pale. But also pale in the sense that because the whole story is based upon Etsuko's memory, and Etsuko is getting old, so she keeps mentioning in the novel her memory is getting unclear and unclear as days continues. So pale has this several sense. And I think, where does the title come from? One important message occurs on page 99 of the novel. I think I read just this part. I spent many moments, when you encounter I in the book, it's Etsuko. I spent many moments, as I was to do throughout succeeding years, gazing emptily at the view from my apartment window. Don't forget, Etsuko here was referring to her life in Japan before she left Japan for England. Her life in Japan when she was still, living together with her husband, Jiro. So she is saying she has spent many, many moments gazing emptily. I think the key word is emptily. 神奇茫然的 emptily. Why emptily? We did not know what really happened between Jiro, the husband, and Etsuko, the wife. But obviously, from the passage in the novel, we could make a good guess. Obviously, Jiro and Etsuko had a divorce. And here is a good hint. Obviously, Etsuko was not happy with her married life. So, she had too many moments looking emptily at the view from her apartment window. Okay? So I think this reflects her psychological condition at the time. So be aware, if you happen to have a girlfriend who likes to look out of window at the view all the time, it shows the girlfriend obviously is not happy with your relationship. So here we can make a good guess. Obviously, Etsuko was not happy with her married life. So she always, look out of the window, look at the blue sky in the open air, okay? I could see far beyond the trees on the opposite bank of the river. We remember a river was flowing through the city. A pale outline of hills, of hills, visible against the clouds. It was not an unpleasant view. The view was quite inviting. The view was quite pleasant. But she in particular mentioned this view, and this view was the view she remembered most throughout the story. And that's how come the story got the title, A Pale View of Hills, because it refers to the hill in Inasa area. So another page on 103, she also mentioned, one hot afternoon, I accompanied Sachiko and her daughter to Inasa. Inasa is the hilly area of Nagasaki overlooking the harbor, renowned for its mountain scenery. It was the hill of Inasa I could see from my apartment window. So she just did not look at it from her apartment window. She even went outing to Inasa. So the pale view of hills, actually the hill refer the hills in Inasa. And obviously before she left for England, Etsuko often liked to look at this mountain scenery, this pleasant view. Okay, so bear in mind, this is how the novel gets its title. And what I want to say is, because Etsuko's memory of Nagasaki is mostly based upon her memory of Inasa, of the pleasant view of hills. So we remember before Nikki returned back to London after her stay with the mother for 5 days, Nikki one day mentioned to the mother, "Mother, I have a good friend who happened to be a poet. She might like to write a poem for you, write a book for you." And the mother, of course, was a little bit surprised and happy at the same time. So the daughter asked the mother, "Could you give me something that could remind my poet friend of your past in Japan? Something that is not too expensive, just some keepsake." Then the mother happened to discover a tone calendar. Okay, a calendar has 12 months with one scenery for each month, and that tone calendar just has the view of the hill in Nagasaki. So the mother said to the daughter, "Will this do for your friend?" Okay, so don't forget, in the book it says Nikki was packing her suitcase on the bed and glanced up briefly. And glanced up briefly at the calendar I have found. "That's fine," she said. "Don't give me anything important." Nikki said, "It's just an old calendar. That's all. I have no idea why I kept it." So you see, both the mother and the daughter mentioned about a tone calendar. Actually, that shows the hilly view of Inasa. So then, thinking the mother kept this calendar for some good reason. So Nikki kept asking the mother, "Do you still think about Japan a lot?" "Mother, I suppose so. I have a few memories." "The calendar I gave you this morning," I said, "there's a view of the harbor in Nagasaki. This morning I was remembering the time we went there." So bear in mind, in the second part of the book, Ezuko in particular mentioned her good memory of the harbor view, of the mountain scenery near Inasa in Nagasaki. And again, as I want to emphasize, that's where the title of the novel comes from. Okay, why the novel is called A Pale View of Hills. The hilly area of Inasa in Nagasaki. And that is the view Ezuko kept looking at from the window of her apartment house. Okay? And then I think you could argue the novel talk about what happened during the Second War, what happened in the Korean War, especially Japan in the Second War was heavily defeated. And, we could say a lot of death, a lot of injured soldiers. So the whole book actually was quite sad, quite melancholy. Even the tone itself was pretty melancholy. But even in such a sad, melancholy moment, in the book, we still find some ray of hopes, 希望之光. We could argue there's optimism in the novel, or you could argue that is the perseverance of human condition, 人性坚毅不拔的那一个层面. Okay, like today, we all suffer from the serious situation of COVID-19. Okay, this virus is ravaging around the whole world, but we still hope and keep hoping the virus will come down and will die out very soon. This is the so-called optimism in humanity. So in this novel, we still can find some good optimism in the novel, and one good character who represents this spirit of optimism, this spirit of looking forward is Mrs. Fujiwara. So aside from Ogata-san, who represents the old generation, there's another person in the novel who also represents the old generation. That is Mrs. Fujiwara. And she obviously represents the spirit of looking forward. And all the young generation, such as Ezuko in particular, or Sajiko, they have all learned a good lesson from Fujiwara, because this woman lost her husband, lost more than one son, lost all her social position, all her fortune during the war, but she kept looking forward. So she offered a good lesson to the people around her who needs, to develop this kind of optimism. So even Ezuko says, Mrs. Fujiwara always tell me how important it is to keep looking forward. And she is right. Don't forget, from the statement we could guess, obviously Ezuko, even though at that time she was big with the baby, she was pregnant, but obviously she did not live a happy married life. She was quite sad, quite pessimistic, quite melancholy in a sense. And that could be one of the reasons why she decided to leave Jiro and went to England for a second marriage, or because of a second marriage. Then Sachiko agreed with Ezuko. Sachiko said, "How right you are, Ezuko. We shouldn't keep looking back to the past." So you see two different life attitudes. One is looking back at the past. We could say, looking backwards. One is looking ahead, looking forwards. So these two different directions, looking forward and looking backward, could represent two different life attitudes. And here, even Sachiko agreed with Ezuko, saying, we shouldn't keep looking back to the past. The war, referred to the Second World War, destroyed many things for me, but I still have my daughter, Mariko. As you say, we have to keep looking forward. So this is a rare, moment in the book that the major characters talks about. Don't lose their heart, even during the time of difficulty, even during the time of devastation. We need to look forward. This is called the spirit of optimism. So I think this is also the very important function of Mrs. Fujiwara. Actually, what I want to say is, when we come upon a character in a novel, in a book, usually a character would represent a certain ideology, 意识形态, a certain idea. And Mrs. Fujiwara, from all our understanding of the book, obviously represents the idea of optimism, of looking forward. And she served as a good example to the people around her by telling these people, even in the time of crisis, in the time of difficulty, don't lose our heart. Again, shows the perseverance, the persistence of humanity in the time of crisis. Okay? And then I think one important, strength in the novel, one important storyline in the novel, 就是一个故事的发展的一条线 in the novel, is the relationship between Okata-san and Shigeo Masuda. If we read the novel well enough, we know Okata-san represents the old Japan, the old generation, whereas Shigeo represents the new generation. But what really happened is, Okata-san actually was the classmate of Jiro, Okata-san's own son. And he was actually the student of Okata-san. Okata-san, before the war, was a teacher of good, high, reputation. But one day, in a journal, in an education journal, Okata-san happened to read or come upon an article written by no one but Shigeo himself. In this article, Shigeo criticized very harshly Okata-san and his generation. And that is the reason why, from the perspective of Okata-san, he thought Shigeo was nothing but a communist, because only communists would attack their teachers. Okay? So Okata-san was so eager to seek out Shigeo. Actually, Okata-san visited Jiro and Ezuko in Nagasaki. Apparently, she visited to pay a visit, or she came to see Jiro, to see his daughter-in-law, Ezuko, because Ezuko at that time was pregnant. She was about to give birth to a baby. That, to us, was the reason, or one of the reasons, but the most important reason for Okata-san to visit Jiro was because he knew Jiro was staying in Nagasaki, and he wanted to seek him out, ask him why he did write such a harsh article on him. Okay, so when they met, this is what Okata-san said to Shijio. I meant to come and speak to you for some days now. Shijio, tell me honestly, do you believe a word of what you wrote? Explain to me what made you write such things. Then I can go home to Fukuoka with my mind at rest. At the moment, I'm very puzzled. So you see, this is the question and the confrontation between the teacher and the student, between the old generation and the new generation. And Okata-san just asked Shijio, how come? Why did he write such an article criticizing the old generation? So he said, I'm puzzled. Then Shijio answered, Okata-san, let me explain. You see, you must understand many things have changed now. Again, remind us, Japan is a transitional society, is a changing society at that time because many things have changed and things are changing still. We live in a different age from those days when you were an influential figure. So you see the conflict between these two generations. The Okata-san still sticks to the old belief, to the old value system, to the old tradition, whereas Shijio is more, pragmatic, is more realistic. Shijio points the fact to the teacher that now society has changed. Now society is still changing, and we are living in a changing society. Get rid of the old belief system. Get rid of the old tradition. So I think, the confrontation between the old and the new, between Okata and Jiro or Shijio, is another important storyline in the book. And the author mentioned this, include this storyline in the novel, I think for one important reason, to highlight two generations, to highlight the new Japan is no longer the old Japan. The new Japan embraces Western value system, embraces democracy, embraces Western culture, Western practices, etc. So there are a lot of debate about democracy in the novel, even between Okata-san and Etsuko. Okay, because to Okata-san, democracy is something imported from the United States, and this is not something Japan needs. But from the new generation perspective, the old tradition, the old value system of Japan has led Japan into a terrible war. So if we continue, we come to realize, Shijio tells Okata-san, but let me just say this much. Yes, I believe everything I wrote in that article and still do. In your days, in the days, of old Japan, children in Japan were taught terrible things. They were taught lies of the most damaging kind. Worst of all, they were taught not to see, not to question. And that's why the country was plunged into the most evil disaster in her entire history, referring to the Second World War that was launched by Japan. And Japan eventually suffered a huge disaster because it started a war. So obviously, through Shijio or through Jiro, we can see the emergence of a new Japan. And this new Japan is able to reflect what has happened in the past. 有反省能力的新日本 Okay? So I think, you could argue because the author himself, Ishiguro himself came from Japan. So he might use this kind of, a storyline to tell the world at large, to tell the whole world that Japan obviously feels quite sorry for what happened during the Second World War and trust Japan. The new Japan is no longer the old Japan because the new Japan loves to embrace Western democracy. Okay? So I think, through their confrontation, we can sense, the confrontation between two different sets of value system. The confrontation between the old Japan and the new Japan. So again, what is emphasized is Japan, when the story happens, is a changing society, is a transitional society. So when we read the novel, we have to realize all the individuals, the major ones, the minor ones, all the characters in the novel, they all live in a changing society. And because the society is changing, so every character needs to adjust themselves to this new change. Some can easily adapt to the new change. Some find it very difficult to adapt to the new change. And that is the reason why, we could argue any novel always deals with the confrontation between individual and society. Okay? We have so many individuals and we have this big society. And the society is changing. And how can each individual find solution, find ways to cope with the change? And I think this is one important storyline in the novel. Okay? And another important, aspect of the novel as this class is drawing to an end is memory. The function of memory, the part memory plays in the story. Of course, this is one important strategy for Etsuko to tell the story. Etsuko in the story keeps saying, "Dear readers, I recount what has happened based upon my memory." But she also argued at the same time, but I'm getting pretty old. So sometimes my memory could be reliable. Sometimes my memory might not be reliable. And on, a certain page, okay, actually, Etsuko points out what she wants to say. She says, memory, I realize, I again refer to Etsuko, can be an unreliable thing. I think the key word is unreliable. Memory could be unreliable. And Etsuko tells her own story based upon her memory. So one way for us to argue is her story, is her narrative reliable? Can Etsuko be a reliable narrator? Of course, if Etsuko is not a reliable narrator, how come we, the readers, want to spend so much time listening to her story, reading the book? So I think this is one important aspect, okay, for us to think about. In other words, if Etsuko is not a reliable narrator, or is she a reliable narrator? What happened if she is not reliable? And what happened if she is reliable? So I think, this, so-called narrative perspective is one of the crucial questions for us to ask. We know as if we have a good reader, we know she's occasionally not reliable. Most of the time, she might be reliable, but occasionally she's not reliable. But Ezuko, as a narrator, needs to pretend, needs to act as if she's 100% reliable. But we know she is occasionally not reliable. So how to make a good excuse for herself when she sometimes turns out to be unreliable? She could only, say, if my recount of the story, if my story happened to be not very, logical, not very consistent, you have to excuse me because all the story is based upon my memory, and unfortunately, memory sometimes is not reliable. I think this is an important, aspect of the novel. In other words, memory and narration, okay? And actually, another, issue I want to talk about is, in the beginning of this series, in the beginning of this book, I talk about the whole book is a story within a story. Who is telling the story? Of course, Ezuko is telling the story, and she is telling the story to Nikki. But Ezuko doesn't want to say, what I'm telling you, Nikki, is my own story. So she needs to make up a character named Sachiko and tell Nikki, actually, this is what happened between, this is what happened to my good friend Sachiko. So in my first lecture, I kept arguing. Actually, when we read a novel, we have to think Ezuko actually is Sachiko in disguise. But if we make this an argument, the story of Sachiko actually is Ezuko's own story. She is telling her own story, not Sachiko's story. We need to find some good evidences in the book. Okay, so I think, this lead to our argument that Sachiko in the novel is a surrogate, 代身一个替身一个代替的人，一个替身。And when Ezuko tells Sachiko's story, actually she is telling her own story. And here we find the good evidences. So you might remember one day, Mariko feels quite unhappy because the mother tells her they are going to leave for the United States the following morning. And Mariko, of course, is so reluctant, so unhappy to leave Japan. And Ezuko tries to comfort Mariko when Mariko expresses her strong dislike, her strong unwillingness to go to the United States. So, Ezuko comforts Mariko in this manner. Ezuko said, the girl said, I don't want to go away. I don't want to go away tomorrow. This is what Mariko, the girl, said. In other words, the girl clearly expresses that she doesn't want to go to the United States. Then I gave a sigh. I referred to Ezuko, but you like it. Everyone's a little frightened of new things. You like it over there. So you see, Ezuko is trying to comfort Mariko when Mariko says she doesn't want to go to the United States the following morning with her mother. Then the girl insists, I don't want to go away and I don't like him. This him, of course, referred to Mariko's mother, that is Sachiko's boyfriend, an American soldier, Frank. And then Mariko, the girl, said, my mother's boyfriend, Frank, he is like a pig. Okay? So the girl doesn't want to go to the United States. The girl also doesn't want to or doesn't like her mother's boyfriend. He's like a pig. Then you see the reaction of Etsuko. You are not to speak like that, I said angrily. I think the key word is angrily. Why does Etsuko need to be so angry if she is not involved? Why does she have to be so angry? Etsuko 理论上是局外人，不应该很愤怒。But obviously, she was quite angry when she hears, Miracle said, Frank, he is like a pig. Okay? You mustn't speak like that, I said more calmly. After some time, she began to calm down. So this time she said more calmly, he's very fond of you. Frank is very fond of you. And he'll be just like a new father, a stepfather, new father. Everything will turn out well, I promise. So Etsuko here said, I promise you, when we go to the United States, everything will go well. But obviously, it's not Etsuko who is going to the United States. It's Sachiko. How can she make the promise? I promise. Okay? Then you see the language change. In any case, I went on. I refer to Etsuko. Etsuko said, if you don't like it over there, we can always come back. So here, Etsuko and Mariko becomes the mother and the daughter. So you see the change of pronoun. Okay? We can always come back. Who is this we? This is one important question and one important clue to the question I raised, that Etsuko and Sachiko actually are one and the same person. Sachiko is Mariko in disguise. And then the girl, this time she looked at me questioning. In other words, the girl still have some questions, some doubt. Okay? Yes, I promise, I said, if you don't like it over there, we'll come straight back. But we have to try it and see if we like it there. I'm sure we will. So, the whole pronoun has been changed to we. We referring to Etsuko and Mariko. And obviously, Etsuko here played the part as the mother. She played the part as Sachiko. So this is one important passage in the novel, a good evidence that we could argue. Obviously, Sachiko is Etsuko in disguise. And when Etsuko tells Sachiko's story, actually she is telling her own story. And this, obvious, is a very good proof. So sometimes, even a pronoun like I, like we, play a very crucial, function in the book. Okay? So we just mentioned the shape of pronoun. Okay? The shape of pronoun. So who is this we? This is the question we have to ask. Obviously, Etsuko in this passage we just read identify herself with Sachiko. So Sachiko becomes a surrogate. 替身 surrogate. Okay? So again, if we try to read a pair of hears, we could argue a story within a story. And we all learn from our reading experience, the major characters in the novel, at the end, we have some kind of sudden realization, sudden awakening, or to use a special term we call epiphany here. Epiphany, okay? Epiphany refers to moment of sudden realization. In Chinese, epiphany, we would say 顿悟, okay? Suddenly you realize some reality. And any major character in the novel will experience this moment of epiphany, this kind of, sudden realization, because at the end, the character will grow up, will become mature. So this is what happened, okay, to Nikki, the young girl. Nikki, at the end of the story, she learns a good lesson. She suddenly comes to realize she did something wrong to her dead sister. Her father also did something wrong to Keiko, the dead sister. So at that real moment of epiphany, Nikki said to the mother, I suppose they should have looked after her a bit more. That referred to Nikki's English father. Her referred to Nikki's elder sister, Keiko. Shouldn't he? He ignored her most of the time. It wasn't fair, really. Now the issue of fairness comes up. Then the mother said, Etsuko said, I want to see if she would say more. Then I said, well, it's understandable enough. He wasn't her real father after all. So you see, at first, the daughter tried to comfort the mother. Now, in turn, the mother decided to comfort the daughter because the daughter, Nikki, also come to realize she is a guilty party. She is one of the person who did heavily wrong to Keiko. So one way to argue about the ending of the story, we could say, Nikki at the end becomes sadder because she learns about the reality, but at the same time, she becomes wiser. And this is what usually happens at the end of the story. The major character becomes sadder and wiser. And I think, these are the several important issues we have covered for this book. So don't forget, one good argument is about the speaker, the narrator herself, that she is telling her own story by creating a character named Sachiko as a surrogate. So if you read the book from the perspective that Etsuko is telling her own story, of course, she needs to employ a lot of strategies in her narration. Okay, and I think this is the last series, the last video for this series. So I'll see you next time, and for next time, we are going to start our reading of a book by Chinese American writer called Waiting. Okay, see you then.